Hello and welcome to this edition of TZM Global Radio. I'm your host for today, James Phillips from TZM Education in the UK chapter of the Zeitgeist Movement. Hope you're doing well out there, guys. The intro for today's show was a song by Jessie J. Maybe it hasn't come into many of your musical spheres of reference. She does tend to be a very popular pop star indeed. But I think that song highlights quite an interesting point, doesn't it? That we tend to think, oh, no one cares about the world and the direction it's going in, and everybody just venerates money. But if someone this popular is singing a song like that and kids are walking around singing it, then maybe it's helping to plant some seeds at least. And even more reason why we should go and talk to kids about this stuff. But it's a little early in the show to go off on that rant. So, a couple of bits of news. We've just passed the post in terms of the Global Z-Day event in Berlin, in which myself and my partner Sarah in TZM Education were present to deliver a lecture that we worked on together for that day entitled Launchpad Sustainability. Hopefully that's going to be edited and up online soon. It was great fun delivering that lecture, and even better fun being in the company of the awesome Berlin chapter, Frankie, Max, Daniel and co. Daniel very kindly put us up at his pad, which was fantastic and awashed with musical instruments, to mention nothing of the excellent company of Brandon and Eva from the LA chapter. Much fun was had staying up far too late than would be professionally advisable if you're going to give a lecture and other things, but somehow we managed to hang on in there. The day itself was fantastic, enjoyed the talks immensely, and thought the program was really well orchestrated and put together. The talks really complemented each other very, very well indeed. Some highlights for me were Stefan's talk on how our brain deceives us and leads us into poor decision making. Essentially, it certainly gave me some food for thought in terms of how we could use some of those exercises in schools with kids to help bring that point to their attention and maybe humble them slightly into a perspective of appreciating the flaws of human decision making in general. The food sharing talk was really cool. I was surprised at the breadth of and extent to which that program has actually been delivered across Europe, and was wondering how that might be taking root in the UK. Certainly interested in looking into that for our upcoming Z-Day event in London, which has not yet taken place, but I'll talk about that in just a second. And there was a talk about veganism, which I know is a hot topic in TZM circles of late, and with good reason. Animal agriculture is the most destructive thing that we do on this planet, and of course the way in which animals are harvested and treated in general is despicable, to say the least. So I just want to talk about that topic a little bit further for what my 2 cents is worth on the subject. I recently tried a little exercise on my Facebook profile in which I asked the question, what principal reason do you think someone would go vegan? The rules of this exercise were that you must not be a vegan to make a comment, and the second rule was no Googling. You just need to give me the first answer that came into your head. Unfortunately, these rules were not obeyed, so the exercise didn't really pan out quite the way I wanted, but I think it kind of got the general gist across. So initially people started commenting, saying the moral argument, basically, the way in which animals are treated. People aren't happy about it, and so they're a vegan. The follow-up question I wanted to ask was, do you feel that this approach first is the best way for them to get their point across to you, or do you think that making the case that a vegan diet can actually be a very healthy way to live if done in a balanced way, of course, rather than just, eating a cucumber and a carrot every day and then wondering why you get ill. Um, so, it can be very healthy. It's a very low statistical relationship to heart disease, and diabetes and strokes, and alike. And as previously stated, environmentally, animal agriculture is extremely harmful to the environment and the ecosystem that we all share. So, given these points and the fact that you probably wouldn't go into the abattoir and kill the cow yourself, do you still feel like it maybe reducing meat consumption at least might be something worth considering? Then asking, if the argument were framed in that way, would you be more sympathetic to it than just mere moral evangelization, basically? I'm not knocking the moral argument, let me be clear. I just feel that regardless of what message you are trying to promote, if you go about it in the wrong way, the person on the receiving end will not be able to hear you. This is something that our movement really needs to understand in all facets, not just if you're making the case for a plant-based diet or you're making the case for a natural law resource-based economy. It doesn't make any difference. If you come at this like every problem's the nail and you're the hammer, then you're not going to be successful. There has to be some tact. There has to be some skill. There has to be some wisdom in this. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And ultimately, what do you really want? Do you want the person to perhaps change their outlook? Do you want them to perhaps understand where it is you're coming from? Do you want them to understand the cause that you're involved in? Because if you go at it in a bull in a china shop type fashion, chances are the other person is only going to want to defend or attack back. It's a natural reaction, basically, in those situations that for most people. So that's the point I was really trying to get at, and I think I kind of got that from that thread. And the other point of the post being framed in that way is to bring to people's attention, almost under the radar, the environmental and health arguments for a plant-based diet, or less meat, shall we say, less meat consumption in your diet. Because that was not the first thing that sprung to people's minds. So it's very clear that the branding, if you will, of the vegan movement, or the marketing skills of them, leave a lot to be desired. And as I said earlier, it isn't just them. It's everyone involved in activism. It isn't to say necessarily that shock tactics don't work and can't work, but there does have to be a certain predisposition towards that point of view. But I still veer towards the side of we should be attempting to use the communication methods that show a higher statistical chance of actually working. I've certainly buy plant-based now, as does my girlfriend. The reason that pushed us over the edge was the environmental reason, after watching a documentary called Cowspiracy. And, we figured, well, if you're going to be an environmentalist, and we're talking about a value shift, then there's something we can kind of do here right today that's actually going to make an impact, especially if we can impart these kind of values in a reasonable fashion to our fellow human beings. One further example could be that someone says, I'm going to reduce my meat consumption. And you might, let's say that you are particularly passionate about the vegan issue, and you come in there and you say, that's not good enough. You need to go fully vegan. You know what? If I was that person, it would make me want to eat a burger in front of you. And I know that's not cool, but it's just the way we work. I just want to irritate you at that point. Whereas if you say, oh, good on you, man. That's really, really great. You're part of the solution, you are, rather than part of the problem. Nice one. What do you think they're going to say? Thanks, man. They are good. I feel really good. I feel really good about doing this now. Maybe I'll do it a bit more. Of course they're going to feel more like that. They're not going to feel like, thank you for congratulating me on this and agreeing that I'm a reasonable and decent person. I think I'll reverse this trend. Come on, be logical, folks, please. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. It isn't what the Zeitgeist movement promote, but if we're talking about a value shift, what does a value shift mean? It surely can't mean eating steak for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and going to work for the arms industry. So you follow what I mean. We do have to change our values. We do have to change our behaviours as best as we can in the system in which we're in. Of course, we need a new system to change behaviours, and we need a new behaviours to get a new system. So it's kind of a dichotomy, guys. That's my take on it, at least anyway. So moving on from that potentially hot potato, and back to Z-Day. I just wanted to clear up something because it was brought up several times after my talk. The question of, but how do we actually go into schools? Schools aren't going to let us in. I delivered a talk last year in London about the tactics that would be wise to use if your intention is to go into schools and talk to kids about this train of thought. And it is not picking up the phone and saying, "Hi, I'm from the Zeitgeist Movement. We want to get rid of money." That's not going to work. Okay? And going in with any kind of aggressive approach is not going to work. The way it works is this. You pick up the phone, you say, "Hi, does your school promote environmental concern and sustainability in general? Do you agree with that sort of promotion, that idea that we should take care of our planet?" They're going to say, "Yeah." And then you say, "Do you like science and technology at your school? Do you like teaching that?" Like, "Yeah." So when should I come in and talk about the use of science and technology for human concern then? When would be good to do that? There's only one answer they can give you, and it's yes. That's how you ask questions. You give people questions you kind of already know the answer to, and one that leads in the direction that you want to go. Some might call it marketing, but you know what? That's the world we live in. We've got to use intelligent tactics, and that tactic has worked with me time and time again. There's no reason why it can't work for you. I'm sure human beings aren't that different just because they live in different countries. Anyway, there are tactics that can work to get your foot in the door. It might mean that you never even mention the Zeitgeist movement, but once again, it doesn't matter what flag you're flying, it matters what message you're delivering. In other words, it matters about the train of thought. So my talk wasn't really on that subject. My talk was more to do with building the efficacy of the argument for why going and talking to kids about this stuff is far more productive than talking to adults, and really just finalizing TZME in terms of the as a data set, if you will, a point of reference for people to use to go into schools. It really has got everything you could possibly wish for. It's got everything from an educational section called Minds in the Making, which builds both the argument for why we need to go into schools and a general understanding of the train of thought, as well as an activity, an action in education section, which gives you all the materials necessary that you would need to go into schools. There will be a further translation project for that website coming up, but as it stands at the moment, we are very busy trying to get ready for London Z-Day, which is going to be on April the 25th at Conway Hall in London, Holborn. So if you would like to get tickets for that, they are only £6. So get your debt slips out and come along to Z-Day in London. The theme of the day is really going to be refocusing in on the Zeitgeist movement. We've done a lot of third-party organisational events, if you will, and promotion at our Z-Days in the past. But really, it's come at a bit of a cost to the movement. People are forgetting the sort of social therapy that has to happen to get us on the right path towards a sustainable future. So we're going to be refocusing in on the main tenets of what it is we advocate, and rather than it be a passive day, we're going to look at it being more of an action-based day. And towards the end, we're going to say there are third parties you can get involved in that we would say are heading in the right direction. If you don't feel like getting in the involved in the movement explicitly as something you want to do, or you can get involved in the movement. Something that was discussed the day after Z-Day on the Sunday at the general meeting, which I thought was really, really productive. We all agreed that we need a better sort of structuring to how we do things, specific roles with and specific projects with specific targets, all that can be compiled online and ticked off by us as we sort of go along. And we're going to try to institute that in the UK chapter, because at the moment it is a bit of a free for all, which is great because people are working autonomously, but also there has to be some kind of structure to how we do this, some sort of aims and objective rather than just a sort of random fire approach. I think there's something to be said for both of them, but I think you follow what I mean. And I think one of the central hubs for that activity really is the GCA. Gil was very forthright in the meeting of saying he really, really needs people involved in the running of the GCA. It takes a lot of work to get chapters organised and keep a handle on how things are going in the movement. With all of these sorts of projects going on that we have at the moment, we really do need help, and it kind of starts there and blossoms out locally. But the best way that blossom's going to land locally is if the centre of the tree and the roots of it actually work quite well, and that really does start with the GCA and general chapter administration. So please do get in touch and get involved. What I'm going to be doing for the remainder of this show today is I'm going to be reading the next couple of articles from the Minds in the Making section of TZM Education, and those are entitled Culture Reflects Education and Education Reflects Culture, and A Change in Educational and Social Incentives. So I'm going to get started with the first of those articles now. Article 3. Culture reflects education and education reflects culture. There is certainly no shortage of educational reform advocates rightly criticising the many flawed aspects of the current educational system. Whilst many of their suggestions are moving in the right direction, the changes proposed often stop short of questioning the underlying reason for why the education system is structured the way it is to begin with. In today's society, you must find a job to meet your life needs, regardless of whether it is something you enjoy or serves any meaningful social contribution. Work is effectively a dictatorship the minute you punch the time clock, and school mirrors this dictatorial approach perfectly. Regardless of whether or not you enjoy the subject in question, you must attend or face some form of punitive measure from an authority figure for any such transgression. Whilst you may be able to change your job or school, the limit to which your socio-economic situation will allow you to do so, along with the overarching presence of hierarchy and coercion present in the socio-economic system, remains in effect. Homework. This coercion does not end when the student gets home either, as children are then forced to put in a second shift in the form of homework. This not only adds to the already toxic effect that extrinsic motivators have on the development of an intrinsic love of learning. For more information on this subject, please see the article A Change in Educational Incentives. But it also has been shown to have no significantly positive correlation in learning outcomes. These points are made in the following talk by Alfie Kohn. And that talk, if you want to take a look at that on YouTube, is called Making Students Work a Second Shift with Alfie Kohn. And further in his book, The Homework Myth, which is also available from his website. You could probably just go and read all of Alfie Kohn's books and all of his material because it's all just gold. So anyway, that website is www.alfiekohn.org. A letter template on this research, as well as the studies into the toxic effect of punishment and rewards in teaching, is included in the Action in Education section for you to send to your local educational institutions. The history of coercive education. Such similarities between our socio-economic and educational system are more than just mere coincidence. One cannot survive without the other, and neither exists inside a vacuum. The history of modern schooling shows the intent regarding the shaping of the educational system to reflect the needs of industry. The following video by John Taylor Gatto describes how the seeds of the current educational paradigm were intentionally devised in the Prussian educational system in the early part of the 18th century. This model was adopted by many governments around the world, and many of its integral attributes still persist to this day. And that video is entitled John Gatto, Prussian Education. This point regarding the servicing of the needs of industry through educational approach throughout the era of the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment is summed up in the following video animation by Ken Robinson, and that is entitled Changing Education Paradigms. The overarching points made here are outlined in more general fashion in the following talk by James Phillips, and that's entitled James Phillips, TZM Education, Vancouver, 2012. Over the course of the Industrial Revolution, industrial requirements have been to put an emphasis on streamlining people for specific, specialized job roles. This was formalized by early operant conditioning tactics and techniques outlined in the following documentary series, A Century of Self. This emphasis on extrinsic motivation via operant conditioning is emphasized in modern schooling methods in the form of grades, praise, and punishment. This subject is outlined in more detail in the article How Do We Learn? One could perhaps take a cynical perspective and ask why, given the coercive nature of our current socio-economic system, would the idea of a truly autonomous education based on logic, reason, and critical thinking be reinforced, when to do so would give the population the intellectual tools to question the illegitimate authority which underpins such control? A point well made by George Carlin in the following excellent clip of social commentary on the educational system and wider society in general, and that video is entitled The American Dream. Time for a change. A factor which will likely push this industrial, economic and educational outlook toward the need for some sort of change is exponential technological advancement and the subsequent replacement of human labour that goes with it. It seems that even if you are not in favour of an NLRBE, then in any successful free market people would need to have purchasing power by being employed. And so a change in educational and business approach of the sorts recommended in the articles on this website would still surely make sense to adopt, would they not? This line of argumentation is further expanded upon in the article The Trojan Horse Arguments for an NLRBE. Why radical change is needed. In a world where the 85 richest members of humanity have more money than the bottom 3.5 billion, and the entire edifice of our so-called economic health is predicated on an ever-increasing rate of consumption, then we must take it upon ourselves to stop elevating the narcissistic, vain, and egotistical pursuit of prestige and power that pervade modern life. We must also endeavour to ensure that the next generations do not grow up to venerate these same destructive tendencies. By making the argument for the educational and social changes detailed in the articles on this website and actively promoting these changes in our local communities and schools, we will be doing precisely this, by shifting the cultural zeitgeist away from its current destructive patterns of thought and into a more positive and sustainable direction. If culture does reflect education and education reflects culture, then both must undergo radical change if we are to make the future a positive one for all the world's people. This is what the articles in this section will attempt to outline, and what the Action in Education section of this site will enable you to start to do. So please take the time to visit the Action in Education section and join in this global initiative to go into your local schools and universities to communicate these ideas to future generations. So, Article 4 is entitled A Change in Educational and Social Incentives, the Role of Money and Extrinsic Motivators as Incentives. The following video on motivation at Z-Day 2014 London, which is entitled Melissa Savist, Rewards and Motivation, as well as the work of Daniel Pink in his book Drive, summarized in the following TED Talk, which is entitled The Puzzle of Motivation. show that the profit motive and extrinsic motivators in general are seemingly not all they've cracked up to be. With the effect of exponential technological advancement and the subsequent growing capability to create and access abundance, this research outlines how some of the inherent tendencies of the profit motive run in stark contrast to the intentions inherent to the worldview that comprises an LRBE. Some of these tendencies are portrayed in the following speech by John Ortberg, and that's entitled "It All Goes Back in the Box." I'm sure you're all familiar with that. The resulting monopolistic collusion culminating in the corporation, the workings of which are outlined in the following documentary, that's called The Corporation. Whilst it is true that increasing monetary reward does indeed help to create an incentive and increase productivity in laborious, mundane or repetitive labour tasks, it's actually inverse to creating long-term intrinsic motivation in tasks that require creativity and the pursuit of mastery, autonomy and purpose. Something excellently outlined by Alfie Kohn at his joint event with TZM, and that is entitled Alfie Kohn and Matt Berkowitz, Education and Competition, the Zeitgeist Movement. Another incentive mechanism inherent to the market system is competition. Companies must compete with each other to ensure market share, leading to duplication and intrinsic and planned obsolescence in the manufacturing of goods, which in turn contributes to a hugely wasteful and detrimental effect on the environment. For more information on this phenomenon, please watch the following documentary, Pyramids of Waste. The negative consequences of competition on human health are gone through in the following talk by Matt Berkowitz, called The Myth of Competition, and Alfie Kohn in the following talk, an article entitled The Case Against Competition. Innovation absent of profit. Many great leaps in innovation throughout history appear to have little foundation in the profit motive, which further contradicts the common perspective found in free market ideology regarding the notion that greater competition in the pursuit of profit is the greatest motivating force for innovation. The following talk by Ben McLeish takes a historical perspective to point out why this assertion is deeply flawed. That is entitled Ben McLeish, The Innovation War, London Z-Day 2011. The fact is that more patents are filed in more financially equal societies, showing that having one eye on your competitor generally means having one less on the task in hand, stifling the creative endeavour. And that is entitled Lower Levels of Inequality are Linked with Greater Innovation in Economies. The problem with the use of carrots and sticks. It should come as no surprise, therefore, that what is true for the world of work is true for the learning environment as well. Contrary to popular opinion, children do not need the common extrinsic incentives of grades, praise and punishment to actively engage in learning. While such methods may gain short-term results, the long-term implications from a plethora of studies show the detrimental effects these tactics are having with regards to instilling an intrinsic, lifelong love of learning. In these studies, extrinsic motivators have been shown to do three things consistently with regards to motivation and creative capacity. 1. Decrease long-term intrinsic motivation in the subject or task in question. This is due to there being no reason for a student to take interest in the subject in question once the grade or reward on offer has been obtained. 2. To limit the ability for students to think outside the box, take risks or think creatively regarding potential solutions to a given problem. This is because to take risks is to compromise the chance of getting a higher grade for the task in question. And 3. To apply only the bare minimum of effort to acquire the grade or reward on offer. This ties into point 1, as once again when the grade on offer has been obtained, there is little point to continue to actively pursue the topic further. These points are summed up in the following talk by James Phillips, that's me, TZM Education, Z-Day 2011. A new perspective on learning. This may well be the case, but surely some rules are still needed to get kids in the classroom in the first place. What kid is going to want to go to class if no extrinsic motivation or coercive pressure exists to do so? Apparently these kids. Summerhill, a rural-free school. And that's entitled Imagine a School, Summerhill. The following documentary film is based on the actual attempt of the UK government to shut down Summerhill, and that's entitled Summerhill 2008. Amazing, best freedom movie ever. Although this was a failed attempt by the British government, it casts an intriguing light into the establishment's attitude towards alternative educational approaches, in the UK at least. Given examples such as this, we could perhaps be forgiven for asking if kids need to be in school to learn in the first place. An example of such a method of learning with this idea in mind is unschooling, summed up in the following talk by Astra Taylor. And that's Astra Taylor on the unschooled life. Culture lag and mind lock, feeding a fear of change. These educational approaches may seem extreme, but as with all discussions about education, we cannot divorce this discussion surrounding education from that of cultural values and socio-economic factors. Given that our culture is based inherently upon competition, waste, inefficiency and hierarchical dominance, it should be entirely expected that the NLRBE and the educational approaches that would be inherent to that model would seem alien from our current cultural reference point. The same could be said of the entire concept of the NLRBE as well, in fact. However, if people pause and reflect on the growing environmental degradation and gap between rich and poor, such a radical out-of-the-box alternative should be entirely expected. Big problems call for big ideas, so to speak. By all means proceed with caution, but we may not want to take too long, as we only have one planet and we are still using it like we have many, many more. This video by Bill Hicks sums up where our motivations could lie in the transition to a more peaceful and sustainable world for all, and that's called It's Just a Ride. This general perspective, and especially the focus on the positive solutions that science and technology can offer in the resolving of human and environmental problems, is something that must be imparted to spark the imagination of the next generation. In order to effect such a positive change, we must start to do so with those who are capable of appreciating this perspective and who have more time ahead of them to deliver it in reality. With the issues of sustainability and global warming being promoted in schools, children provide a captive audience ready to hear what we have to say. So please do take the time to visit the Action in Education section of this site and join in this global initiative to go into your local schools and universities to communicate these ideas to future generations. So that's the next couple of articles. The next one I'm going to be reading is entitled Building a Learning Environment, and maybe I'll even try and get through the next one as well, which is Building a New Paradigm from the Inside Out. But we'll see how things go, as I have to prepare a lecture for London Z-Day, as well as reorganise the entire UK chapter, somehow go out there and continue to earn some debt slips, and keep a boat moving along the Grand Union Canal. So, if I get time. Speaking of time, it's time for me to go. Thanks very much for listening to me today, and also on the subject of time, remember that really that is the only currency you have. So in this brief flicker of time that you get to experience on this pale blue dot with the rest of us, please do spend your currency wisely. And if in spending that currency you're only doing it for the money, then may I suggest, in the words of Ben McLeish, you're probably doing it for the wrong reasons. Thanks very much, guys. Take care.